Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Deep Blue Rediscovered series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we are up to Game 5 of the 1997 match with Garry Kasparov white and Deep Blue as black. So after Game 4 we had 2 rest days, and those had been explicitly requested by Garry. Well, the extra rest day anyway. There was always going to be a rest day after Game 4. And yeah, I mean, the Deep Blue team, Feng Shu describes that they were just busy fixing bugs, changing a bit of stuff, testing it out with the Grandmasters, doing some opening preparation, though they sort of felt that yeah, opening preparation was pretty unlikely to occur, considering Garry was playing anti-computer chess. After Game 4, IBM's CEO Louis Gerstner visited the site, was asked to comment on why the world's media was so taken with this match. The big boss commentated, well, what we're witnessing is the world's strongest player against Garry Kasparov. So, nice little comment there. This fifth game was pretty thrilling, actually. It was Garry once again got a lot of chances, but yeah, just didn't manage to take them. They were difficult, and well, Deep Blue survived to fight another day, the last day. So let's have a look how it went. So we got knight f3, d5, g3, bishop g4, bishop g2, knight d7, and here Garry played h3. And everyone was greatly surprised when Deep Blue played bishop takes f3, because yeah, I mean, clearly everyone had sort of decided from the previous games that Deep Blue had a big bias towards bishops and would never give up a bishop for the knight. I mean, as we've seen, a lot of this bias, certainly in the opening, was a human bias that was in the extended book. And actually, Deep Blue was more than willing by itself to give up a bishop for a knight. So yeah, Feng Shu makes the comment that, yeah, well, you know, it's all contextual really, and Deep Blue might just be a bit more sophisticated than, yeah, wanting bishops rather than knights, which I think is also a fair comment somehow. I mean, I do think that, yeah, you know, people really hadn't really got to grips with yeah, what engines could do at the time then through Deep Blue and what they would be able to do in the future. And yeah, you know, our human brains can deal with a certain level of complexity, and we assume that that an engine is at that level too. But yeah, somehow the things that they can do are often, yeah, much more than we could even dream. And well, Deep Blue was the first step on that way. Actually, in this position, after h3, bishop h5 was in the extended book with a weight of -11. And bishop takes f3 had a weight of -6. So in principle, you know, Deep Blue would be pushed, nudged towards bishop h5. But yeah, obviously its own feelings about this made it override the top move in the extended book and played bishop takes f3. E takes f3 is possible. It's quite common to play like this, but yeah, in principle, black always aims to put a knight on f5 just in front of that f pawn, and then looks to start weakening the kingside dark squares. It's quite interesting, but as long as black plays yeah, quite consistently, then it's fine. Actually, the engines had an interesting idea there to move this pawn up to h5 very quickly in order to stop black from playing h5 yourself. This was a game Leela against Stockfish, which I find slightly hard to fathom. Rook g8, f4, knight f5, d4, queen e7, c3 and g6 now. And well, you go bishop g7 and castles and c5, and just a very interesting position, but you know, perfectly fine for black. I think bishop f3 fitted Garry's purposes much better. C6. weight minus 14, so this was always going to be the move. D3 and then E6, and I think this move got criticised a little bit. But again, it's the human extended book there. Deep Blue was actually keener on knight f6, but e6 had a weight of minus 9, which was stronger than anything else. So that sort of nudged Deep Blue towards this. So after e4, I think that Deep Blue was out of extended book after e4. That's what it looks like to me from what I'm seeing. And yeah, I mean there were all sorts of ideas. Knight f6, castles h5 was what Deep Blue started with. The use of the rook's pawn in this game is really strong by Deep Blue. Again, shadows of the future AlphaZero somehow. But in the end, the move that cropped up third in Deep Blue's PV was the one that was played, and that was this move knight e5. Quite an interesting idea. So bishop g2. Funnily enough, Deep Blue was expecting castles, so yeah, really doesn't care about bishops at all. Bishop g2, and now d takes e4, which is quite interesting. And here, bishop takes e4. Also Stockfish's choice with 0.47 for white, so a slight advantage. Yeah, Stockfish only played d takes e4 when forced to. Yasser said, "This is just plain silly. Garry has a long-term advantage of the two bishops and should quickly steer the game into a superior endgame." Yeah, interesting. I don't know whether the game in the game 4 influenced Garry's thinking. Thinking that well, Deep Blue had handled this two rook and knight position without queens extremely well. So yeah, didn't really feel he could he'd necessarily be having an advantage there. Or maybe, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think when you're stressed and you're tired, you do revert to type. And certainly I know that when I was calm and full of energy, I was very happy to play endgames. When I got nervous and tired, I was happier playing my more natural game, which is attacking. So it might have been that as well for Garry. This is actually, I'll just show you a few Stockfish against Leela games, because in principle, I mean, this does look quite pleasant for white. I mean, I was thinking just f4, knight ed7 and e5. This seemed quite decent to me, but the engines are not really that keen on that at all. They just say knight d5, we play f6, and after takes, well, this pawn is weak, plenty of counterplay. We'll play for f5 and then e5, castle queenside, and yeah, they don't have a single problem with that at all. Yeah, I find it. I tend to agree with Yasser's evaluation, but seems like the engines don't agree with it at all. So bishop takes e4. I mean, is completely understandable as well. I mean, you've got the two bishops, and let's just see what black can do here. Bishop b4 check. Got some different commentary. Both John Nunn and Danny King thought that it was a bit of a clever idea, especially in conjunction with black's next move. Yasser was very scathing there. Patzer sees a check, Patzer plays a check, which I think is a bit unfair. I mean, well, it is unfair. I mean, the point is that white can't play the move c3. Knight c3 would just look a bit odd in this structure. Bishop d2 would just allow some more exchanges. I mean, white would have nothing at all. So white has to go knight d2, and that's sort of gumming up the works a little bit. It's not a stupid move, especially when put together with a very aggressive continuation in the on the next few moves. What the engines were looking at though was the immediate h5. Probably you don't really need this move bishop b4 check. And after queen e2, bishop d6, if d4, knight g6, h4, bishop c7 was the idea. And actually, the funny thing is that in all these games, the engines are actually still castling kingside. That's the quite amazing thing somehow, that Deep Blue, we'll explain it later, but really played h5 thinking to castle queenside. the engines here are saying, yeah, but h5's fine, and we'll castle kingside. This weakening is worse for white than for black, or at the very least, it's not bad for black, which is quite shocking. But the idea is just that you're going to get in a quick e5, blast open the centre, and then you're never going to have a chance to really exploit this h5 pawn. And of course, having the pawn on h5 gives you a nice square on g4 for the knight. So, pretty interesting. But deep blue played bishop b4, check knight d2, and now h5. And the engines didn't particularly want to play h5. With bishop b4 check, they were looking more for castles. You might say that the timing's a little bit wrong. But, the move itself, the concept, the engines were quite okay about it. Feng Shu said some funny things. Garry was surprised, so were all of us in the operations room. Michael Iescas didn't like the move at first. After a moment's thought, he said, well, maybe 1 or 2 of the top 10 players would play it, but only after a drink or two. It was quite interesting that during the game the reaction in the press room was that h5 was a computer move, with some people inserting stupid before. It's quite funny. I mean, you're looking at this now and you've seen AlphaZero and all the other engines that have followed all playing these moves automatically, all the world's top players playing it automatically, and there we were, Deep Blue in 1997 already doing this stuff, and we're just saying stupid computer. Some of it's quite some of it's quite strange somehow. What Feng Shu says is that this actually came from the redoing of the king safety evaluation that they'd been tweaking a lot, and the point was that Deep Blue understood that it wanted to castle queenside, so then it didn't mind moving kingside pawns forward, which was apparently a lot more sophisticated than normal engines. It had a separate king safety algorithm for queenside castling and kingside castling. So basically it could sort of contextually infer, that or understand that if I'm castling queenside, it's okay to push my kingside pawns. Of course, as we said, modern engines are saying, well, I push my h-pawn, then I don't mind castling kingside either, which is, another step forward. But it's just one of the ways in which, Deep Blue was really a lot more sophisticated than anyone could have understood. John Nunn said some human players who like pushing their rooks pawns, Spielman for example, might also have played this move, but it's certainly interesting that Deep Blue finds this quite sophisticated positional idea. Yasser didn't like it at all, but he's he's a more solid player, I think. So Queen e2 was played, Queen c7, c3, Bishop e7, d4, Knight g6. And Garry has to take a decision here. I mean, h4 is coming in here, so Garry played h4 to stop that. But of course, you've got g4 for the knight now. So now Deep Blue played a very aggressive move, e5. Again, the moves are maybe not the very best that Deep Blue is playing, but I think you can really see, the spirit of modern engines. You can really see it in the way that the Deep Blue played this. Very dynamic, very aggressive. Any chance, to do something often being taken like that, and even wing play quite strong as well. Garry didn't react in the very best way. He played the move knight f3, although that should have actually worked very well. Knight e4 is a move the engines want. Garry says in deep thinking, I could have got a large advantage by moving my knight to the e4 square. The engines say 0.66, but you need something quite... black needs to play quite carefully to do it. The idea is that black plays knight g4, and after f3 just goes back, with the idea that you've weakened the dark squares and also blocked in this bishop. But this is what the engines give: d takes e5, castles, bishop e3, f takes e5, check, stopping f5, king b8, castles, and white looks a little bit better here. I mean, this king side feels a little bit loose. I mean, I don't need to be thinking tiny small advantages here, but 2 bishops, some weak pawns, king's a little bit vulnerable, which is a bit annoying. I feel a little bit uncomfortable against an engine, to be honest, with my king like that, but you might be able to do something of it, but I don't think it doesn't feel that huge. But there were some engine wins on there. Stockfish beating Leela a couple of times here, and 3 times, 4 times. Yeah, so 5 times. Yeah, that was right actually. 6 times. It's sorry, Mr. Beads. Leela was suffering quite a bit against Stockfish in these types of positions, but so obviously there's some stuff in there. But as I said, from a human point of view, I do find this a little bit worrying with my king like this. So Garry played the move knight f3, which is very reasonable. And after e takes d4, I was wondering about c takes d4 here. And it's mentioned by Daniel King as well in his book Kasparov Against Deeper Blue. In actual fact, this is one of those moments where the engines say, well, if you castle queenside, it definitely works, but castling kingside is what we're looking for here. And after castles, rook e8, queen c2, knight to f8. Now you're going to repair the pawn structure a little bit, and you'll be able to play g6, play knight to e6, knight to d5, bishop f6. Then black's absolutely fine. But actually the engines were playing c takes d4 a number of times here. But here actually a crucial moment in the game, and I'm not sure it's ever been commented on actually, but after knight takes d4, the engines want to go castles, kingside simply. Pawn on h5 is weak, but after castles, rook e8, queen c2, we go knight g4. And queen f5, we just go queen e5 to handle that. And knight f5, bishop f6. Yeah, what can you say? I mean, black's fine now. We're going rook e5, we're going rook e8, and very, very active. And actually, there's a lot of threats here. I'm already getting a bit nervous with white there. But yeah, that sort of concept, the idea of playing h5 and then castling kingside, I think that's certainly that was very, very unusual. I can't think of any human player that would actually do that. Not even Ben Larsen, I don't think. I think this is really something very concrete that's really come up with recent engines somehow. Because the amazing thing is that after castles, the engines are just saying castle kingside, and Leela is at 1.27 and Stockfish is at 2.18. I mean, basically they just say, well, you've just got you're just killing him. You're just killing him completely. There's nothing you can do. So if bishop c5, we go b4, rook e8, queen d3, bishop b6, bishop g5, rook e1, and then a4, and then off we go. Don't worry at all about any pawns here. Just open the queen side. Takes, rook a1, and we're going to have queen b3, rook b1, or queen a3, and it'll just work out in the end. Even rook a2, rook a1. Leela just killing Stockfish from this position. It's just trivial for them. Which is amazing, right? Or maybe not so amazing, actually. When it's the sort of thing that when you look at it, you sort of say, well, yeah, right. But yeah, somehow, this sort of moment, really went completely unnoticed in contemporary annotations, and even in later annotations as well. And I really think that that this is something that we definitely have learned from engines, or the way that engines anyway have expanded our understanding of what's possible. The idea that you move a rook's pawn and then castle to the king's side is possible. And these ideas. Thing is, I think you could probably. Maybe we just lost something in chess after a while, because I think if you showed this to Tal would just be saying, yeah, easy win somehow. To be honest, I think Garry might also think this against a human player, might have thought this against a human player, but against Deep Blue somehow by this stage, probably not. And what Garry does is just not very good. I mean, he ends up just sort of tying himself in knots to castle queenside, in a way just to equalise the imbalance somehow. But yeah, it doesn't really lead anywhere at all. Knight g4 played, castle queenside, rook to e8, queen c2, king b8, and king to b1 here. So Yeah, just no, white's fine. You know, I mean, the pieces are quite good, but this knight on g4 is quite irritating, and obviously black's king is quite reasonably safe now. Pieces are reasonably active. You know, there's not that much wrong for black. I think, you know, the engines are still seeing a small advantage for white, but nothing amazing. So bishop e5 takes, knight e5 played by deep blue, and this is a sort of position that also that deep blue will handle quite, you know, will handle. You would expect it to handle it well. I mean, it handled a lot of positions well that you didn't expect it to handle well, but this is, you know, open position, pieces active. It's going to be quite awkward, and I think, yeah, I remember from deep thinking, Garry was quite worried about this position. He was really thinking, this is not what I was really looking for. Yeah, if rook h5, we just go c5, we chase the knight away, and then rook takes d1 and knight f2 is happening. So Garry played rook e1 here, and now c5, and yeah, I mean, this is quite worrying somehow. I mean, you're obviously, you sort of hope that your tactics are going to be fine, but I mean, there's moves like, you know, knight f5, you go g6, and knight h6, this is an engine line. And now f5 was I thought that was very, very beautiful somehow, you know, because if g takes f6 and knight h6 is possible. But, you know, I can imagine that Garry was a little bit nervous about this. But he plays, I think he plays very well, actually. Knight f3, just keeps it in balance and then gets some more chances somehow. And knight c4. So, yeah, queen b6 actually is quite an irritating little threat. Maybe threatening knight a3. So Garry plays queen a4, hitting the knight and the rook. But, yeah, deep blue has got something prepared. Just parries the threat. Because if rook d8, queen c4, we've got queen d1 checkmate. So rook e1 was played, knight b6 and queen c2, and yeah, okay, you know, this is all vaguely under control. The only thing that you need to do somehow is you've got to do something about this knight or get your pieces active. There are quite a few possibilities now for deep blue. Queen d6 was the move that it played, and that was very, very reasonable. Knight c4 was suggested by Garry, and yeah, that would be quite decent too. Something like queen e2, knight d6, get that knight active. After knight d2, a5 is what the engines want. Just shove that a pawn down. Yeah, I mean, basically, there are even some engine games where black just played rook d7, rook d8, and just said, well, what do you want? You can't do anything here. So, yeah, you know, I mean, there's nice thing about playing the knight there is that if you go f3, then I've got you know, ideas like rook e8. But queen d6 was very reasonable. c4 from Garry. I think a good move, actually. Just taking away d5 from the black knight and, yeah, asking black to see whether wants to do anything concrete. And yeah, here deep blue played a rather risky move. I mean, if you wanted to exchange off queens, this seemed like the way to do it. I mean, after all, you know, keep your kingside structure intact, and this is supposed to be pretty even. But deep blue played the move queen g6, and Garry says, to my delight, deep blue played a terrible queen move. And Yasser says an exceedingly bad move. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's not so terrible, but it does give white a lot of hope, really, you know. So from that point of view, I can imagine that Garry was very happy. But after after knight takes f2, it's just 0.32 from Leela. So, you know, nothing terrible happening yet. Knight e5 was the engine move, but Garry played rook e6, which looks quite reasonable. King c7, rook g6, rook d7. And now Garry played knight h4, looking for knight f5. But this move, knight c8, is very nice indeed. Deals with all the threats very nicely. Knight f5, I think we've just got knight e7 in this position. You know, just completely dealing with the rook. Actually, knight e7, rook e7 is pretty embarrassing for that rook on g6. So bishop d5 was played. Yeah, just and now knight d6 from deep blue. Knight e7 would also have been fine. This is engine line, and actually, yeah, you know, you kind of, in a way, surprised deep blue didn't do this because it's pretty concrete, really. But deep blue played something a little bit more complicated, but also quite interesting. Knight d6, and after rook e6 played the move knight b5, which is very nice indeed, threatening knight c3 check, and if you try and cover it, then knight d4 is rather nasty. So c takes b5, rook d5 played, rook g6, rook d7, knight f5. I mean, it's still very, very sharp indeed. You know, feels very risky indeed. But yeah, you do also sort of feel that black should be fine. Knight e4 played here, and now knight g7 from Garry. So it's all about really, you know, Garry's managed to get a past g pawn. He's attacking this pawn on h5. What can black do with counterplay? So rook d1 check, king c2, rook d2, king c1. And then rook takes a2 here. Yeah, Deep Blue playing very well here. I mean, obviously, there's quite a bit of possibilities here of you know, little draws, playing knight c3 and rook e2, and then you've got this this draw here. I mean, you can also just try and get behind the pawn and deal with it there. So there's quite a few ways for black to play. But actually, just around here, it turned out that Deep Blue made a massive mistake in calculation. I mean, despite calculating all those moves, you know, in pretty impressive speed, even, you know, by modern standards, amazingly enough, still, you know, making some mistakes in calculation. Because here in this position, I think knight d2 was more or less the only thing that Deep Blue looked at, but there was all sort of stuff that you could do. Well, all sorts of stuff is going too far. I mean, knight c3 is quite natural, looking for this idea of going rook e2 and knight a2, but white can simply play the move rook e6, stop your rook getting to e2, and then that's basically it. You're just going to queen that pawn to glory. So that doesn't work. But rook g2 is quite nice here. The idea is that when white goes knight f6, just trying to free up the knight there, then you can put the knight on c3, and after g4 you go rook e2, and you know, you're going to be absolutely fine there. And if you start checking, then well, you know, the black king's coming in, and it could even be quite difficult for black. But getting behind that that g pawn and just making life difficult for white is really important. And yeah, you know, white can do all sorts of things, but it's just never going to be enough. But Deep Blue played knight d2, which was actually aiming to grab the b pawn and then move the c pawn down. And this was analysed a lot at the time. I think John Nunn was looking at rook f6, which was quite dangerous, but wasn't actually winning. But actually, there was a very simple win here, which was rook g7 check, king b6, and g6. And it just turns out that, yeah, whatever you try and do, it's never going to be enough. Let me just show you maybe a slightly more yeah. Illustrative way, because the engines just give up basically. You know, they just say, oh yeah, can't push the c pawn. But let's see how that looks. And rook c8. So you're simply dealing with that, and then you've just got the threat of g7 to g8. I mean, it's actually really not that complicated. King e2, knight d4, king e3, knight f5 check, king f4, rook f1, king g5. Well, you can imagine. Oops, sorry, king g5, rook f3. Our computer's lagging a bit. g4, and well, that's it basically. You can imagine that your c pawn isn't going to advance more than your than the g pawn can. So yeah, I mean, rook g7 check was really a very simple win, but yeah, obviously, you know, it Garry was very tired. Yeah, long match, tricky match, emotional match, difficult game, and yeah, somehow didn't quite manage to do it. I mean, knight f4 is very reasonable. I mean, I'm sure Garry was looking at, you know, these setups with the rook on e2, and he's thinking, well, I'm also covering the g2 square and covering the e2 square as well. You know, it looks like a very good move. Also, you have these possibilities of going knight d5 and just restricting that king. But I think this was kind of what Deep Blue was looking at. Yasser now looked at king d1 an awful lot, but simply c4 is just yeah, very strong. The engine's just looking anyway for a draw really after this. Yeah, it's all, you're just losing control completely. I mean, this push of the c4 pawn, down c3, c2 is just too much. Yasser was looking at rook d2 check first and c4, so already taking out this knight on d5. Some interesting ideas actually. Knight e6 and knight d4 there. That was the engine main line. King d5, knight b3, rook g2, and the engine thought that this could still be drawn for black, but obviously it's a lot more risky. c4 first of all, keeping this idea of rook d2, stopping knight d5, followed by c3, c2, c1 in reserve. That was way better. Garry played king b1, and I think he'd already seen the end already by this stage, which was really impressive, I have to say. Rook d2. Rook e6, c4 and rook e3. So this is Garry's idea. I mean, basically you're trying to, you're stopping the c-pawn from advancing, and you're also, stopping black from getting back through the g-file. You're covering all this stuff. But now Deep Blue had calculated this beautifully, in actual fact. g6, king takes b5, g7, and king b4. Yasser makes the comment, Garry wanted to win this game badly, and I think he expected victory. When it wasn't achieved, his agitation increased. He'll be very tense for game 6 with so much at stake. As he himself joked, I hope I won't resign in advance, which was an amazing comment to make, really. But after king b4, I think the game was agreed drawn here. The key point being that if you go g8 queen, then we've just got rook check, and rook check with perpetual. And are there any other ideas that white could do? Rook e2, interesting there. We go rook d1 check here, king b2, c3, king c2, rook c1 check. Oh, good lord, yes, I was looking at all these things with the engine. I mean, to me, this is just a total mess somehow. It was, but king e3. And then rook d8, that was the idea. And you're sort of covering this, but your king and your knight will help to queen the pawn. So, but it's quite complicated lines, right? Knight d4, g8 queen takes, knight takes c2, king e2, king d4. King b4, king d1, king b3, and felt that this was still a draw. Yeah, still some work to do, I think, but the engine's seeing a draw here. So this was a very, very interesting game, and Garry really did very well. I mean, there's some very interesting moments. I mean, first of all, I think Deep Blue giving, I think like a little foretaste of AlphaZero and the engines that we have nowadays with this plan of 11h5. Really showing some sophistication, even if the execution wasn't quite right. I also found this moment fascinating. This idea that here the engines consider that black should be castling kingside. Don't worry about the weakness of this pawn, and that after castling the opposite castling kingside, that this is just absolutely winning for white. No worries at all. Found this quite amazing. I was also very impressed by Garry's play. I mean, that middle game with all those pieces, all over the place like this. It was would have been very easy to go wrong. And Garry made something of it, and Deep Blue one bad move, knight d2, and Garry could have won it somehow. It wasn't too complicated, but everything's complicated when you're playing an opponent as strong as Deep Blue and all that tension and everything. But it could have gone differently. The whole match, it really was that close. But Deep Blue held on with some excellent calculation at the end, and it was all to play for in the last game. Deep Blue with white against Garry in the fateful and iconic 6th game of the 1997 match. See me there!